Hello, I hope everyone is doing well. Hope everyone will have a wonderful Shabbos. And we look forward to seeing everyone who will make it to Shul this week. This week's pre-Shabbos video Dvar Torah is sponsored by Dr. and Mrs. Nelson P. Landy in memory of Nelson's father, Dr. Lawrence M. Landy, Zichron Levracha, whose yard site he recently observed. And we thank the Landys, and his neshama should have an aliyah. I'd like to share with you two interpretations into one pasuk, one verse in this week's parsha. The two interpretations come from two great 19th century Torah sages who are almost exact opposites in their Torah personalities, their Torah perspectives, their backgrounds, what they brought and to the Torah, and how they enhanced the understanding of the Torah for the entire Jewish people. One of these great rabbis is Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the great 19th century German rabbi who was a rationalist, who was enlightened, who was well accustomed to the culture of the day and could speak in those languages, and wrote amongst his many works a masterful commentary on the 5 books of the Torah. And the other great rabbi will be the Kutzker Rebbe, Rav Menachem Mendel Morgenstern of Kutsk. There used to be a Mr. Morgenstern that lived in 50 Green Street, who passed away, who was a direct descendant of the Kutzker Rebbe. The Kutzker Rebbe was a Hasidic Rebbe who lived in Poland right around the same time, born and died about 20 years before Rav Hirsch. And he was mysterious and a mystic. He was extremely sharp and pithy in his statements, and also sharp in how he pushed his students and his followers. He sometimes would retreat from the world, lock himself in a room, and not speak to anyone for sometimes very long periods of time. So very different approaches to the Torah, and perhaps that is expressed in how they understand the following pasuk. In this week's parsha, we have the second paragraph of Shema, in which we read, V'samtem es devarai ela al levavchem, and you shall place my words, these words of mine, upon your hearts. Very similar to the phrase in the first paragraph of Shema, V'hayu hadvarim ha'ela al levavecha, these words should be on your heart. And what is bothersome, what a number of commentaries pick up on, is why is it V'samtem es devarai ela al levavchem, you shall place these words, the words of the Torah, the words of Shema, believing that Hashem is one, that we love Hashem, that we will be rewarded and punished based on how we observe the mitzvahs. We shall place these words on our hearts, upon our hearts. Why on and upon, as opposed to within? Well, first explains as follows, and I elaborate a little bit on his core idea. To place something in our heart, that means it's in a very deep place, but it's there, it's passive. It's just sitting there. Perhaps it will recede into the subconscious. If the words of the Torah are on our heart, the imagery is we have our heart and the Torah is upon it. Anything that is resting on something else exerts a force on it. It feels, the lower item, our heart, should feel the weight of the words of the Torah. Place the words of the Torah on our heart. They should always be on our heart, not weighing us down in a negative way, but that we should feel their presence. We should never forget about them. They should make an impact on who we are. That is the interpretation of Rav Hirsch. The Kutzker Rebbe sees in this pasuk, approaches it almost from the opposite angle. He says that, no, in fact, we hope, the ultimate goal is to place the words in our heart. But the Torah does not tell us to do that, because sometimes that is not possible. Sometimes our hearts are not open. We are just not in a place to be inspired, to fully connect. We may just be tired physically or emotionally or spiritually. And what the Torah is saying is that you must always think about these words. You must say Shema every day, study the Torah. And Hashem says, I'm not asking you to put it on your heart, because sometimes your heart is not open, but always place it on top of your heart. Even if your heart is closed, so to speak, but always make sure the words of Torah are close, because if they are resting on your heart, when the moment comes when you will be inspired, when you're ready to connect, when your heart will open, the words of the Torah will fall in. A person davens every day. That doesn't mean that he or she feels it every day. But if you daven every day, then when there is that day when you are ready to feel it, the words of davening will seep in, will touch you. But if you're not davening, if you're not putting it close to your heart, so even when you're ready to be inspired, you won't be touched. Sometimes we study parts of the Torah, stories of the Torah, mitzvos, and they kind of just wash over us. We're not so interested. We're not really focused and connected. We're not in the mood. We're not ready for whatever reason. But we still are supposed to study the Torah, because if we do, so then when we'll have some other life experience, something will click, and that's what that means, or now I understand what this mitzvah is all about. It will fall into your heart. According to the Kotzker Rebbe, the pasuk is saying, we want to get the words in your heart, but your heart is not always ready. So put them at least right next to your heart, on top of your heart. And so when your heart is ready to open up, they will fall in. These are the two interpretations of Rav Hirsch and the Kotzker Rebbe. They, of course, are both absolutely true, and we hope to take the words of the Torah. We can think about this when we read this pasuk every time we say Shema, when we'll hear the pasuk read in shul, if you will be in shul, and just in general, a mindset of how to serve Hashem, how to study the Torah, how to do His mitzvahs. On the one hand, the words of the Torah should be on our heart. We should feel their presence. They should be noticeable. They should be making an impact upon us. And we also put the words of the Torah close to our heart, upon our heart, so that we are ready in those moments when we are ready to really be inspired for the words of the Torah to really touch a deep part of ourselves. So the Torah will be with us. The Torah will, so to speak, fall into our hearts, as the Kotzker Rebbe puts it, and it will touch the deepest parts of who we are. Good Shabbos, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. May we be inspired by the words of Rav Hirsch and the Kotzker Rebbe.